Hey guys, Vader here. I'm going to be showing you today how to make broccoli sprouts using a mason jar. All you need is a mason jar, or a jar really of any sort, and a bunch of broccoli seeds. You can get these online pretty cheap, and they make a lot of sprouts, so you don't need a lot of them. If you don't have a mason jar kind of this size, you can use any sort really, but ideally you want to have kind of a mesh lid like this. If you don't have a mesh lid, just use a standard jar and then just punch a few holes in the top. And by a few, I mean probably maybe 20 or 30 holes in the top to allow for adequate drainage, which I'll show you how to do in a sec. So the first step is, for a jar about this size, which is 24 ounces, 3 cups, you want to use about maybe 3 to 4 tablespoons. So I'm going to do that now. Take about 3 to 4 tablespoons and pop that inside the mason jar. Put about 3.5 in, so you can see that there. It's not too many. Next thing you want to do is you want to fill the jar up with water. You can leave the lid off, it doesn't really matter for this part. You want to soak them for about 8 hours minimum. So ideally soak them for a full 12 hours, but I tend to get up in the morning and soak them, and then in the afternoon I start the draining process. So pop them in the jar, leave them soaking for about 8 hours or so, and I'll meet you back here in a sec. Okay, so the seeds have now been soaking for around about 8 hours. What you're going to do next is start the wet and drain process. So first of all, empty out all the excess water. Make sure all of it's drained out, but it doesn't matter if it's a little bit wet. What you do then is you want to take the seeds and kind of shuffle them back into the jar a little bit, then slowly turn the jar around. And what this does is it maximizes the number of seeds that are stuck to the outside of the jar, as you can see here. This make sure that the most number of seeds as possible are exposed to the light. And that creates the sprouting process, which is going to deliver a lot of awesome sprouts for you. What you do next is take a Tupperware container, this one here, I've got a glass one here, and you're going to be resting the mason jar at around about that angle so that it slowly drips the water out. If it's kind of sitting at this angle, it doesn't matter too much. It's a little bit flatter, it doesn't matter too much. But ideally you want to be having it at this sort of angle so the water drains out, but you also still maintain a nice humid condition inside the jar for the sprouting process. I leave this by the sink. Then around about, at a minimum, twice a day, morning and night, you want to be filling the jar with water, giving it a good shake, tipping out the water, and as I said before, you want to be shuffling back the seeds so that you're kind of maximizing the coverage on the outside of the jar. That's particularly important as the start of this process to maximize the light exposure. Pop it back down in the Tupperware container and leave that. After about 3 or 4 days, we're going to have a nice big jar of sprouts. I'm going to try and record a time lapse so we can take a look at that. I'll see you back here in 3 or 4 days. Okay, here we have it. This is the final product. Here is your broccoli sprouts. You can see this jar is quite densely packed. It's absolutely full of broccoli sprouts, chock-a-block. You can see that there's actually quite a nice green color to these particular sprouts. This is because they've been sprouting in a pretty sunny position. You can sprout them, in a less sunny position, but they tend to go a little bit more yellow. I prefer to have them nice and green. What we need to do now is we need to complete the final rinsing process. You just need a nice big bowl. That's what I got here. And a sieve and a spoon as well. I'll show you how that process works in a sec. Basically what's going to happen is we're going to be filtering out, first of all of the seeds that didn't sprout will sink right to the bottom of the bowl. And then all of the brown husks where the sprout has actually left the husk will float to the top. So we need to get rid of both of those. So I'll show you now. Okie dokes. So I'm over here at my sink. I've got my sieve, my nice big metal bowl, and my spoon. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take your bowl. I'm going to empty all these lovely broccoli sprouts into this bowl. See, there's actually quite a lot of it. It's quite densely packed as well. There we go. Okay, I'm just going to pop that to the side. Here are all the sprouts. Lovely. What we're going to do now, just fill up this bowl with cold water. I'm just going to be agitating the sprouts as we're filling the water up. What that's going to do is just release some of those brown husks. I'll bring the camera over here so you can have a look. Just going to release some of these brown husks and let them float to the top. There we go. All we need to do now is basically take all of these brown husks with our spoon and just empty them down into the sink. Okay, now I think that is pretty much done. There's always going to be some left in there, that's fine. You can still safely eat those husks. I just find that it's a little bit nicer to have as many of them as possible removed. The next step here is we're just going to take our sieve and we're going to slowly pour out the sprouts into the sieve. And then as we get to the final stage here, we're going to have a little bit of a few of the seeds rather. They're going to be stuck down the bottom here. Bring it in close so you can have a look at that. And those ones there, they're all the seeds that kind of didn't sprout. Okay, they're going to sink down the bottom. Now you don't really want to eat those, so I tend to pour them out into the sink as well. Obviously trying to save as many of these beautiful sprouts as possible. All right, move this bowl out to the side here. And that leaves us with this nice, big, dense mass of broccoli sprouts. Okay, I've rinsed out the mason jar here. All I'm going to do now is just pack all those beautiful sprouts tightly into this jar here. And then I've changed my lid. This is my sprouting lid here. It's got the mesh. Now I've got just one of the regular sealing lids here. And I can save as many of those sprouts as possible. And then chuck on the lid and refrigerate. And that's going to keep for probably about 3 to 5 days. I've even eaten them up to a week after, but they do tend to get a little bit soggy and they don't taste as good towards the end, but they'll keep for about 3 to 5 days ideally. There you go, broccoli sprouts.